Lousin, you've been very visible as an educator and a trainer and a thought leader, but you're here for a different reason today. In Jumpstart Mastery, we are extremely interested not only in these principles, but in the transformation that we must undergo, let's say, to become even remotely good at these principles. And my dear friend and colleague, the great Cassandra Wojcik, is here, who provided an enormous amount of inspiration and technical expertise to bring the Jumpstart Mastery platform to the public sphere, but more importantly, to provide offerings and titular headings and frameworks around this business of personal transformation as a journey and as a lexicon. A vocabulary is attached to it. You have a personal journey and a profound one with Alex, and you've talked about it elsewhere. And we're really interested, I'd say, in our community of, in the Jungian sense, how you've integrated that suffering into peace. You have a whole approach to negotiation education that you call peace negotiations with yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and that journey, and Alex, if it's not too broad of a initial salvo for you to begin interacting with us. Yeah.
You're going deep immediately, Andy,
Yeah.
aren't
Yeah.
you?
I want to make best use of the time, So
Sure.
yeah. I
Let's
know
do
that
it.
you're capable of it. If you were someone I didn't know, I wouldn't even attempt this, but let's open the door and hey, let's dive in like as deep as we can go.
Let's do it. Let's do
Yeah.
it. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the warm introduction. Hello, everybody. I see we have very many professionals here from the field, professional negotiators, crisis de-escalation experts. A very warm welcome. Happy to connect with all of you on LinkedIn and learn more about you. Yeah, so as you said, Andy, my background is in business negotiations mainly. I've been a professional negotiator for about 20 years now, mainly in the business field. And about 6 years ago, I had to put all that knowledge into practice when I was faced with the biggest hardship of my life, which was the discovery and the diagnosis of a terminal illness for my son. He was 6 years old at the time, and he's now 12. And he was diagnosed with a muscular dystrophy called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And we have DJ Kimball here, who has a very beautiful way of showcasting that despite that condition, we can still have a very beautiful and meaningful life. So thank you, DJ, for being here.
Yes. Welcome. So glad you're here, DJ.
And in that moment your life changes, right? When you get a diagnosis from a doctor saying, okay, your child has a severe condition that's only going to get worse and there's no cure yet. Basically they were telling us, go ahead and make nice memories and enjoy as long as you have, because you don't know how long you have. So then your world crumbles and you can be the best negotiator in the world. Who are you going to negotiate with then? Right? Like, you can't negotiate the disease away. You can't negotiate a cure. You can't negotiate with the doctor of saying, give me another disease. You can't negotiate, the disease to go away. So then you are forced to go within and to, despite the pain and the struggle, find a way to have what I call peace negotiations with yourself, of saying, okay, chapter 1 of life and the way you thought life was going to be is now over. And that is something that you have to grieve. Like, forget about all the, the things you thought you were going to do with your son, like playing basketball or playing football. Like, forget about those things. And you grieve that part. It's a proper grief. And then try to make peace with the situation, try to make peace with the part of you that thinks, oh my God, my life is over and how am I going to deal with this? To come to a position where you say, okay, now there's a point of acceptance, in the sense as acceptable as it can be, and then start journey part 2 with this condition and with the news, and saying, no, this is not the end of my life, this is the end of that life. the life I had imagined. And that's okay. And that takes grief and sadness. And we have the right to take the time to be sad and grieve that. And then there's a moment of getting back up. There's a moment of saying, okay, how am I going to live this new life with this new information that I didn't expect? And of course, I hope nobody will ever have to go through. But when you do, you do. So then the question is, how do you do that? And what I found really interesting and sad actually is the neurologist a year later, 2 years later, when she saw that I started sharing information online, she said, Lucy, we have a big problem in the medical world. And that is that whenever we give a very, very bad news, especially when it's to people about their children, we see that about 80%, 80, of parents go into a depression, diagnosed depression. So that is a high number, but I would say I think the reality is close to 100%. The rest is just simply not diagnosed.
I can't see it being any less than 100. I don't know
exactly,
how
right?
one wouldn't.
And that's totally normal and that's totally okay. But what was worrying, she said about 20 to 25% of those stay depressed.
Oh, hands down. That's probably a conservative number.
Probably, right? So that is a very high number. And the problem with that is when people go there and stay there, they give up hope and they don't see a reason to continue fighting, to continue bringing their children to see the doctors. So she said, we lose contact with some of them where they're like, you know what, if there is no cure, why would I come to you? Why would I do any tests? Why would I try a clinical trial?
Instant despair. Yeah.
Yeah. And they just give up and then they don't go see the medical stuff anymore, saying, this is such a hassle, never mind. And then they go into like, let's wait and see, or I even had a parent was very sad and she told me, I will live after his death. So that's very, very sad. But those are the things that we're dealing with, the parents,
like
the
she
patients,
suspended the capacity to live in her mind until after he passed. Lousin, I did my research, as you mentioned, in the green room, and if I may, I'd like to invite you to talk about something. There was another program in which you spoke about a particularly dark period where you had not a vision, not necessarily unlike the one you just described, where your vision of once the diagnosis occurred and you were in France at the time, hey, we're going to move, I'm going to set up this life for everybody. And then maybe I'd love to hear, and I think our audience would love to hear, the pivotal moment. What made you begin to transition your worldview, which was this interaction you had with your husband? And I think that's profound, because like you were pushed. You've often said in other areas of visibility, in negotiations, what do you do when you're pushed against a wall? I can't think of a wall more at the end of the road than the one you were pushed up against. And you found a capacity to adapt, which is another characteristic that you speak a great deal about in negotiation education. If you could talk a little about that personal journey with us, I think there's learning that all of us can enjoy from what you went through, because not everybody has the resilience that you refer to do what you did. Profound.
Okay, I'll share it, Andy. I've only shared this once, but I'll do it tonight.
If you want to do it in a limited basis, Lousin, I'm not trying to set you up like,
we're here
hey, welcome to Jumpstart and let's talk about this thing. So if you want to put some, some hedges around it, it's cool. But you're with world-class people who
exactly. I'm very happy
understand
to be with
this journey. Okay.
Here.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, I will share it. Because I think there is when we open up to people, when we are vulnerable, especially when people look up to us for advice, I think it's one thing to share the textbook information, But when we open up about our own experiences, I think that creates a level of trust and bonding that then helps people relate and open up as well. I mean, this is what we do in high stakes negotiations all the time, right?
Well, that's where
And
the
that is the
gold is, as
reason.
Cass would say. That's the gold, you know?
Absolutely. And that is the reason that I'm sharing these things, because there are so many people who can relate, and not necessarily because they have a sick child, but because they have been a patient, because they have lost somebody, because they're fearing of losing somebody, etc., etc. We can all relate to adversity. So that moment that you're talking about was when we got the diagnosis. I asked the neurologist, what can I do? And she said, nothing. There's nothing you can do. There's no cure. There's no. And I said, there must be something I can do. Like, what would be beneficial for him? And she said, the sun, physiotherapy, and like aquatherapy and that kind of stuff. So I said, okay, fine, sun, water. Where can I give that? And that's when I thought about Dubai. We'd been here on holiday several times, and I said, let's just move to Dubai. You know, like, I don't care it's on the other side of the world. I don't care it's expensive. Let's just go and create memories for the kid, because that's something that we can keep. Whatever happens, we will keep the memories.
Yeah.
So my husband and everybody else thought I was completely crazy, like I was in shock and I couldn't think. France is a great country with a great healthcare system, but it was just not very accessible. And I knew these are the last few years that my son is still walking. One day he's going to be in a wheelchair, and the place we live is simply not adapted. So, long story short, we decided to move to Dubai. 3 months later, we were in Dubai, and I was trying to be careful with the spending because everything's very expensive. And it was just a horrible, horrible period where you're in this new country. I didn't have a car yet. We didn't have a house yet. And by the time we had everything, it was super hot. And, it can reach 50 degrees Celsius here. That's really, really hot for those who
Yeah.
think
And
in
there's no
Fahrenheit.
socialized medicine, there's no insurance system. It's pay as you
No.
go. So you have to earn to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But my idea was, even if we stay 1 year or two, let's spend all our savings. It doesn't matter. Let's just give
Right.
him great memories. And worst case scenario, we go back to France. It's fine. But while I was there, it was harder than I thought to get everything set up. But what I did was I got him into a great school that costs a fortune, but it's a great school. And we rented a house, and while I was buying all the furniture, there was a moment where I thought, you know what? I just want to create the best life possible for him, for them, my son, my daughter, and my husband. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized I can't do this. Like, I cannot raise a child who's going to have severe handicaps. I cannot take care of somebody who I know, if there is no medical miracle, I'm going to lose him. Like, he's going to leave before me. And that's obviously something no parent ever wants to think about. But when it's right there in your face and you have to, it was just difficult. And call me weak, call me stupid. I just thought, I'm not going to do it. I decided I'm not going to do this. I'm going to prepare the life as good as I can. Beautiful school, beautiful house, beautiful car. And then I'm leaving. Like, I'm going to take my life. So that was the idea, and I was setting everything up. And one day I remembered lying there in the heat without the AC, and I Googled how to commit suicide and make it look like an accident. And thankfully, I read an article that said this beautiful phrase that I'll never forget. This is what saved my life, and what I've used in suicide negotiations. It said, "You don't want to die, you want the suffering to end."
Yeah.
And that is so true, right? Like, when we see that in suicide negotiations, they don't see a way out. They don't necessarily want to die, otherwise they wouldn't be talking to you, but they want the pain to go away, and they don't see any other way of that pain to go away. So that was a bit my situation. And so a few hours later, I saw my husband and I told him, I said, you know what, I Googled. And here I was expecting empathy, expecting,
Yeah.
an arm around my
Yeah.
shoulder, or,
Wake up. Yeah.
some form of care.
Watch this. Yeah.
But that's not what happened at all. That's not what happened at all. When I told my husband what I had just Googled, he became furious. He was so angry. And he looked at me with this fire in his eyes, and he said, I would never forgive you. That was not the reaction I was expecting or hoping for. But at the same time, Andy, and this is where I can say, anger can save your life. I was so shocked, like, huh? Like, I don't want on top of this a fight with you. So that's when he said, I'll never forgive you. Like, what about me? What about Elise, our daughter? And that's when I realized I don't like the worst thing that could happen to me is happening, and I don't have a way out. Like, I can't even decide that I'm not gonna do this. I really felt like somebody was choking me and I didn't have a choice but to be pushed against the wall. But then I realized I do have a choice. You know what? I do have a choice. I can still commit suicide or I can choose to live. We have that choice. And you know what he also said? He said, you always wanted to live on top of a mountain and be a monk. Go do that. Like go to Tibet, become a monk, get out of this situation, but just don't leave life yet.
Yeah.
So I realized I do have a choice. I can go sit on top of a mountain. Like there are many, it's very, very sad reality, but there are many parents who leave their children when they find out that they're sick. Many fathers, unfortunately, they walk away. It's too hard to deal with. And I'm not judging here anybody, but that is a sad fact.
Oh, I understand that suffering all too well, and the need to, let's say, intentionally forget or block out a intimate relationship, because of the suffering attached to it that I don't want to experience. That you summarized, and I've been on more than a few in varying degrees of intensity. And Kevin Briggs would probably tell you the same thing. Scott would tell you the same thing. Any suicide intervention we went on, 99.9 times out of 100, if you're still talking to them, it's because they want to live. Otherwise, it would have happened already. And the ones that happen already generally was a phone call a few hours before with a purpose. Like, hey, I'm calling to say goodbye. Thank you for everything you tried to do, but I'm done. And there's really not much you can do about it, and then whatever I'm trying to do in the moment, the decision's already been made. Those are by and large the minority. And it's a game of inches. It sounds like this interaction with your husband led you to a capacity to feel and think something in that moment.
Exactly.
Selflessness,
what he did,
service. What do you think it was? How would you label it?
I think what he did in that moment is made me realize that I did have a choice. Because I was so angry. I was so angry at life, at God, at circumstances, at everything, thinking like I didn't choose for this. If like I can't handle a child who's sick. I'm not strong enough. I didn't choose to have a child with this type of condition. Like I was just angry. I was furious at life. And I thought I didn't have a choice. Like they were forcing this situation onto me and I didn't have a choice. I was pushed against the wall. And my husband, by saying, go live as a monk on a mountain, made me realize I did have a choice. Like I could live on top of a mountain. I could leave life, or I could stay. I could stay in the house and I could take care of him. And thankfully I made the third decision. I decided, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take care of him the best I can, but then I'm gonna do it my way. And that's when there was a form of liberation, of freedom that I felt, of saying, the life is not what I wanted, but I get to choose how I'm gonna live this life. I get to choose how we're gonna deal with this. And I had, I guess, the courage, you could say, of saying, doesn't matter what everybody else thinks, we're gonna do this our way.
Well, it sounds like there was something empowering for you in that. A new, like an unlocked capacity to see that you could influence forces around you for good, in the service of Alex, in the service of your family. It's like when you speak to the capacity for adaptation, your reference to Viktor Frankl and had you read Man's Search for Meaning by this time yet?
No, I read it later.
So Viktor gave you some language for this. You want to talk about what jumped out of that book at you that you
Well,
applied?
I love that book, and it's a classic, right? And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. It's a super thin book, but it's full of insights on how to face adversity. And this man went through some of the world's hardest
Right.
hardships. He
Yeah.
lived in
World War II,
concentration
Nazi
camps.
Germany was there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he lost many members of his family, but he survived. And from his professional point of view as a psychologist or psychiatrist, I don't remember, he explained the impact of mindset, of vision, of all those things, and how that can literally save your life. In the stories we tell ourselves about the circumstances we're in. And yeah, there are many, many beautiful quotes in that book. And one of them goes something in the lines of, if you're forced to face a situation where you can't do anything about, then it's all about going inward and changing yourself. I mean, I completely butchered it here, but
That's all
something
right.
like
But that changing yourself requires knowing yourself. And that was the whole
yeah,
basis of his logotherapy approach. And he influenced so many people. And
yeah.
would you say that this transformative experience led you on a journey of self-exploration even more than what you had been on to date? Did
Yeah, I mean,
Tibet suddenly become interesting? Did even in the figurative sense?
yes, absolutely, because the woman I was before diagnosis wouldn't be able to deal with this. Like, she had
Yeah.
to die too. Because I was
Yeah.
Miss Finance, I was working on trading floors of investment banks. I wasn't connected with my feelings at all. I didn't know what intuition was. I was Miss Excel. Like, I had my 9 screens and my 3 phones all day, like woohoo. And that woman simply couldn't deal with this. Like, she wasn't emotionally mature enough to deal with something so big. So there was a part of me that I had to let go of as well and say, I need to reinvent myself. I need to become a person who can deal with this. And we all have this capacity because, tonight we're talking about my story, but everybody goes through hardship, and you already have gone through hardship, and you will go through hardship. That is just a given. And the problem is, you always think that these things are going to happen to somebody else until it happens to you. Like, we're all going to go through hardship, that's a given, but we don't have the tools. Like, nobody has taught us, how do you do it? How do you stand back up from adversity? How do you build resilience? How do you face massive loss? Like, why aren't we teaching this to children? Why aren't we telling them, guess what, you're going to have difficulties in life?
Yes.
um
Well, there are people in this meeting that are laying those roadmaps now
good.
to bring raised awareness to these principles. Because Lousin, when I look at you and I hear this about how you had to change and transform, that what I'm feeling in my gut as I'm listening to you and watching you is that beliefs that you held so strongly had to die so you could remain,
Yeah,
and ideas that you held on to strongly had to die in the service of something far greater, and a capacity for the fullness of you to be realized that could not have occurred without those beliefs dying.
exactly. Absolutely. And let's talk about mental health for a second, because when you go through loss, like, nobody's expecting you to be Superman or Superwoman in that moment. Like, take the time, breathe, cry, hit the wall, do whatever you have to do. Because there is a part of you that leaves also,
Yeah.
that was attached to whatever it is that you lost, whether it's an idea or a person, it doesn't matter. And I had to let go of that, and I had to reinvent, okay, how are we going to do this? And how am I going to face this? And you know what? It's going to sound crazy, but I'm very grateful that 2, 3 years prior, I had gone through a proper depression, like clinically diagnosed 13 months journey of a depression that had nothing to do with personal circumstances. It was rather about work and stuff. And I'm so happy in that moment that I had that experience, because I decided consciously, we're not going to go there again.
Right. You had that kind of formative experience that you
Yeah,
wanted not to repeat.
because it wasn't that long ago. So I knew exactly how I felt, how that was going to go. And I said, I'm not going to go there. Like, if I don't have that possibility, then how can I become the best person I can be so that I can take care of this child? Because in the end, this is not about me. This is about Alex. This is about a 6-year-old child who needs his mom to be happy and joyful and strong enough to make good decisions for him. This was about him.
Lousin,
I
I'm
had to push
curious.
myself aside.
When you were diagnosed, did they immediately write script? Was this in France when this happened?
Yeah.
So what was the French psychiatric response to this? Because in the United States, we're giving out SSRIs and antidepressants like candy.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what was the French care system's response to your need?
Honestly, it was about the child. There wasn't much care for the parents.
When you said you were depressed, though, and had a diagnosis.
Oh, 2 years before.
Right. Did they throw medication at you?
Yeah. Absolutely. Like candy, definitely. Same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
In France, you go see a doctor for a headache and you leave with a bag full of drugs. Yeah.
Kevin, are you listening to this?
Yeah, that's the way it is as well. Yeah, same thing. But yeah, I didn't want any of that. I wanted to stay sharp. I wanted to know what I'm doing. And again, I have nothing against medication. I have nothing against depression. I'm very grateful that I went through it before. But in that moment, I decided I'm just not going to go there. Like, that's not an option. So suicide is not an option. Depression is not an option.
Yeah.
What can we do here? And that's when I decided, okay, the young lady from finance can't handle this. So I need to change. And the thing that gave me energy and empowerment and motivation was to say, since we were in a new country, it felt like a new beginning. And I said, I can be whoever I want to be, and I can make the decisions that I want for my child. And I don't need to justify that to anybody. It doesn't matter if my parents don't agree, if my mother-in-law is against it. It's between me, my husband, and our kids. That's it. Like, make the world as small as possible so that you can manage it. And that's what we've been doing so far. Like, we decided our new North Star is going to be memories, memories, memories. We're going to create experiences, enjoy life, take as many pictures and videos as we can. And that's it. We're going to travel as long as he walks. And that's how we're going to face life. And that's what we've been doing. And we've been creating amazing memories. And, let's also talk about the positive aspects of it, because there are. I'm very grateful that we came to Dubai. This place has been amazing. It's very inclusive, very accessible, because it's a new country, right? Everything has been newly built. So everything is accessible for a wheelchair. You can't walk anywhere because it's too hot. So you go everywhere by car anyways. So he feels less different. His school is great. So I'm very happy that we're here. And he's having a good life. Honestly, for a 12-year-old, I think he has a cool life. Of course, he's becoming weaker and weaker. He can't walk anymore. He cannot stand anymore. It's becoming heavy to start to feed himself now. So we need to find solutions for that. But overall, he has a good life. And I keep reminding him that he has a great life. Like, okay, he has this condition, like, and everybody has a condition, something. Some, physical, some mental, some financial. We all have something. This is his to carry, and we're here to help him. And through him, I've decided, to share the story and to talk about it in conversations like this and articles and posts and whatever not, just to tell other people a diagnosis like this is not the end. It's just a end of something and the beginning of another. And this might sound extremely weird, but honestly, I've never been as healthy and as happy as I am right now.
There's nothing unusual to me about that. That's all you, Lousin. That's how you integrated and transformed through this. And it sounds like set the tone for how your family was going to structure meaning in life moving forward. I'm curious, when you engage providers, professionals with this incredibly, let's say, enlightened affect.
Yeah.
How do you manage interactions where providers, let's say, are less enlightened and less empathetic and I mean, I'm sure you've met some very empathetic providers, but look at what you've described. You've turned the conditions into gold by virtue of transforming and influencing the transformation of worldview within your family. Starting at pushed against the wall with where you are in this darkest place. Now that has been transformed into gold. And you're engaging a care system, and will continue to engage a care system that's way more unconscious than you are about what you've come to understand is important. What would you say the attributes of meaningful communication and negotiation are with providers that, let's say, might not be as particularly sensitive, or might have messaging that is kind of negative, or just have a complete naivete or lack of awareness about the emotional intelligence component of the dialogue?
With providers, do you mean the healthcare professionals or
Yep.
other parents?
Yep.
Yeah, oh my God, that's a whole new world, huh? Well, obviously I have loads of negotiations with healthcare professionals constantly about Alex's needs, and I'm always surprised about how little these people are trained in the capacity of delivering bad news, in active listening skills to the patients and their caregivers, in understanding their role. And this can be because they wear a white blouse and they have some form of authority. But in the end, I believe healthcare professionals should always remember that, just like me as a business consultant, their role is to advise, to recommend, but not to push through any treatment. Because in the end, and this is something that we all have to remember, the patient or the patient's caregivers are the decision makers. It's not the doctor, it's not the neurologist, it's certainly not the PT. The parents decide, the patient decides, and they are here to recommend. So if I believe professionals, from the second they want to diagnose or they want to inform somebody of anything that is negative, like any bad news, that is an opportunity to bond with your patient. And this is exactly where it goes extremely wrong, because
So often
they deliver bad news, and I totally understand it, and I have empathy for them. They deliver bad news in a way that is so robotic, because they want to separate emotions from factual news. So they put on this robot face and they deliver you bad news as if they were reading a page in the newspaper, with zero understanding of how emotions work or anything about neuroscience. You know what happened to me? Because I knew this stuff, when I went to the neurologist the day of diagnosis, and I knew she's either going to give great news that it's not the worst case scenario of Duchenne, or she's going to tell us the worst case scenario and it's Duchenne. Either way, I will be disconnected from my thinking brain.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex. I knew, like, this is going to happen. She's going to tell me something, and then I'm going to go in my limbic brain, in my emotions, and I can't process what she's telling me anyway. So I asked her, I said, would you agree for me to record this conversation? Because I know soon I'm not going to hear you anymore. And she looked at me like I was crazy, but she said, okay, fine. And that's what happened, because I remember the moment she said, we didn't find dystrophin, this means it's Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I don't remember anything else. This is exactly what happened. And this is what happens when you're facing bad news. You can't think anymore. Emotions take over. And you can be a professional and you can know this, it's still going to happen, because we're human, right? You
Right.
can't leave your limbic brain at home. And that's what happened. So I believe medical professionals have a responsibility and an opportunity to bond with their patients at the moment that they're giving bad news, by being empathetic, by understanding what's going to happen for the other person now, and make 2 appointments. 1 appointment to deliver the bad news, and then let them go. They can't think anyway. And then a 2nd appointment, once the emotions are calmed down, to explain, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what I recommend. This is the action plan. Let me know what you think.
What a
And then see it as a
fascinating recommendation. You know, I never even considered allowing for a period of let's say, grief.
Just integration. Yeah, integration of what
Yeah,
they just
like,
heard.
here's the news, and we're going to come back together at 2:00, take some time, or maybe even give the person the option. Take some time and we're going to meet together later. Or if, I would imagine there might be some people that would want to attach their need for hope or even denial reaction to whatever was going to come next out of the provider. I can't tell you how many times I had to get between a patient who wanted to take the head off of a doctor because of the manner in which the doctor provided very little choice in a decision that had to be made, particularly about involuntary psychiatric medications. Like, you have to take something, but it's going to be one of these three. And then it's a free-for-all in the treatment room with the doc protecting him because the patient wanted to take their head off. And
but that starts in this moment, because when they diagnose or when they give a bad news in that way, and as a patient, you feel like a number. What is it that you think? The doctor doesn't care. So if the doctor doesn't care, the danger then is patients are going to go on Dr. Google, self-analyze stuff, not take the doctor seriously because they're like, doctor doesn't care anyway.
Yeah.
And they're going to make their own decisions. And even worse, when they decide not to comply with whatever the doctor is advising them to, they don't tell the doctor. So how do you, as a medical professional, want to help your patients if you don't know that they don't do what you tell them to do?
Right. This is such a wonderful conversation. Dan Gapsh, who's on this call, and I have provided crisis de-escalation training to who knows how many psychiatrists over the years. Psychiatrists. And they invariably come through the training that we do, and they say at the end, we didn't get this in medical school. This was entirely needed. There's no shortage of need for the things that you have described as vital to the meaningful acceptance of this kind of news and opportunity to transform it into something good. And if that's carried out in a callous way, even if the intent is not bad, it's so unnecessarily damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, the other side of the coin is doctors who do this well, who make their patients feel heard, understood, who have some form of empathy, who just have a tissue box on their table. They can build this bond with their patients, and then the patient can inform them of their fears, of side effects, of certain treatments, etc. And then together they can come to a treatment that does work for the patient, because that's in the end what we want, right? Like, I mean, you don't become a medical doctor because you don't have empathy. There's some form of empathy because you want to help people. So then help people, but do it this way that they feel like you care. And of course, I can't imagine the stress they're going through, and it's very difficult to deliver bad news. But it is a lost opportunity if they do it in a way where the patient feels like this person doesn't care at all. So then they can go window shopping or get a second opinion, third opinion, etc. But that bond is not there anymore. And it's it's the same for the patients. Like when I tell Alex, okay, we're gonna go to see the doctors again. Like we do this very regularly, right? We have roughly at least 150 medical appointments every year.
Oh.
So it's in and out of hospitals, in and out of clinics, and he knows who he likes, who he doesn't like. And guess what? It's for now a fatal condition. So nobody has good news. Nobody.
Right.
Like it's all bad news. It's just getting worse. But some are really bonding with him and asking him what he thinks, and are not asking questions about him to me while he's sitting there. He's a 12-year-old kid. Ask him.
Yeah.
For example, his orthopedic, he's fantastic. Like the whole session, they're just talking about football and who's winning and who's losing and what's his favorite club. And he loves it. If I say, we have to go and see Dr. Ibrar, he's very happy. Fine. And in the meantime, he does the scans, he looks at his spine, he does what he has to do, but the kid feels great. So just because you have to deliver bad news doesn't mean you have to make the whole experience negative.
Well, there's relationship. The kid's not alone. His loving mother brought him there. There's a doctor who's interested in what he thinks and what he feels. and he's not alone. That's I can't underscore enough the power of. Cass mentioned it at the beginning of the chat. Everyone needs an empathetic witness. Alex has an empathetic witness in his mom, an empathetic witness in his care provider. Beautiful comments in the chat. Lousin, if you're okay with it, let's transition. Yeah. There's people who want to ask questions. My man Dan had his hand up. Dan, fire away, brother.
Thanks, Andy. Luz, thank you so much for doing this. It's pretty amazing. Andy and I have done a lot of this with psychiatric, but in my other job, I've been a pastor for 25 years, and I've been with people in time of death where I had to translate what the doctor said because the doctor said it in such medicalese that the family couldn't tell whether it was good news or bad news. And, you know, helping people to understand that, and they don't teach it in nursing school or medical school. It's a challenge. You bringing it out is just amazing.
And you should know Dan is a nurse, Lousin. I'm going to say it, Dan, every ward, every shift. For 40 years, he's just bringing his career to an end. He's worked every ward, every shift at a very large state hospital here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, psychiatric hospital.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your service, Dan, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, but it's true. We need to teach people how to communicate, how to negotiate, like even like caregivers or patients. There's so much negotiation happening with the doctors. Like, you know, I feel like sometimes I'm a firefighter between medical staff and Alex, where they're pushing on a certain treatment. I don't want him to have that treatment because of the side effect. They don't take me seriously. Like, who am I? How many times experts have said complete nonsense about this condition? Like, it's a rare disease. Believe me, the parents know more than the doctors because they're 24/7 reading about it. Well, you have to, as a doctor, take care of 50 different neurological conditions. So of course you don't know every detail of everything. So take the patients and their caregivers a bit more seriously. But yeah, we need those tools. Like, I really wonder if I hadn't, if I didn't do my job, who would be able to negotiate for him this way?
Oh, it would have been a completely different deal, Lousin. I mean, what you were able to bring to bear.
And I talk a lot with other parents, with other caregivers. It's really not easy when you don't agree with the doctor to speak up. I mean, you're speaking up against authority based on the culture and the education you've had. There is this fear. There is this fear of being wrong yourself, like the doctor must know. No, the doctor doesn't necessarily know. Number 4 death cause in the world is medical errors. And if the doctor makes a mistake, you're the one having to live with it. So we are responsible of our own health, and we need to take that role more seriously. You know, obviously when we're not sick, but when we're sick, we need to investigate and not just blindly follow and take any treatment. Like, if you're allergic and you have a worse reaction, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. So we're codependent and we're co-responsible for our health and the health of our children.
It's a beautiful way to say it. Kevin, I'm wondering, could I invite you for any thoughts on this? Are you able to talk, Dr. Hochschorn?
Yeah, let's open up for Q&A, guys.
Yeah.
Happy to hear anything, especially if you don't agree. That's okay. We can negotiate.
Thank you so much. I'm kind of speechless at your courage in talking about these things. And I also wanted to just say, kind of like Andy, I had never really thought about the giving up the whole presentation of bad news, and it's not just not involuntary medication, it's involuntary, you know, treatment. It's having the diagnosis of schizophrenia, which is, you know, there's so many myths about schizophrenia, and I cannot tell you as a nurse the dozens of times I've been present when a physician told a family that their 16, 17, 18-year-old child had a first break and was going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so this kind of loving compassion and training our providers on how to do that with humanity is just brilliant. And you're right. I mean, nobody teaches this in schools, and this needs to become just like the use of seclusion and restraint and the dangers associated with it, this needs to be part of curricula for medical professionals. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
How to deliver bad news. Like it can literally be just a 2-hour training and change so many lives.
Lousin, you remember the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago when you were thinking about the future?
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea that came out of today's discussion, flushing that out. I'm just going to say this because I adore her and she's one of my favorite people. I won't even just Google Dr. Kevin Huckshorn when you're done, and that's who you just spoke to.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I'm honored. Thank you.
All right, good. Folks, feel free to raise your electronic hand or drop something in the chat if you'd like to provide Lousin some feedback or how this discussion has been experienced by you, or if you have a question. Or I'm just going to call on you like my brother Troy. I knew he was going to do it. Okay. Go ahead, Troy.
Well, you know, I was doing it of my own accord, but Lousin, thank you so much for your courage in agreeing to be here. Truly an amazing story, encourage resilience and capability. And I think what really struck home for me here, in addition to the amount of courage that you have, is how systemic it is in our society, the lack of emotional training throughout all different career paths. I happen to work in law enforcement. I have seen it in security, and you're relating it with hospitals and with doctors and nursing staff. And even at the very beginning, when you referred to yourself in receiving the news about the diagnosis of your son and saying that we personally as individuals haven't been trained to deal with this. And when you really start to put all of it together and we kind of get out of our lanes and our silos where, you know, I'm conditioned to think about the law enforcement and the security because those are the people that I trained. And you look at that broader picture, it really speaks to what you and some others here have said today, and that is that overwhelmingly, I think we as a society need to engage in training others and individuals in professional capacities so that we can connect on that emotional level, get that rapport, and make an impact. So I appreciate your putting this out there and making your story available so that more people like us here can then broaden our horizons and make an impact. So I think you've done that today. The one question I would ask is that with all your interactions through the medical community, and clearly you have quite a few of them, 150 a year, I can't even imagine. Do you see overall, I mean, I know there's exceptions, does there seem to be some acceptance of this idea, or is it still like a wall and a barrier and they're not going to accept this and we're going to keep doing it the same old way?
Well, I've seen both. Thank you very much for everything you shared and for the service you are providing to the community. Troy, that's a good question. And I would say it depends on the personality, because I've been seeing doctors in France, in the Netherlands, in the UAE. So it's a bit international. We've been to the United States as well. I've seen very young doctors, very old doctors. I've seen men, women. And I wouldn't say there's anything that you can specify. Culture plays a role. It's the way the professional views themselves and their authority. And are they willing to have that questioned? So I think it's more open-mindedness and an ego issue more than anything else. And I totally agree that we need to train them. But more and more people, like when I tell them about my job and what I do, and obviously I don't go in hardcore negotiate with against them, right? Like I always go in with the collaborative approach, first of all, because that's my style, but second of all, because I need them and this has to be collaborative. So, but if they want to push on something to my son that I don't want, and then it's simply not going to happen. And when I tell them about all this, most of them are very open to the idea of, you know what, we need training. Like I've talked many times for medical conferences and medical hospitals, and I do that for free. Like it's not a money thing. It's because we need more people to understand that they are negotiating every single day. We all negotiate every single day. I mean, most of us are negotiation professionals here, so we understand, but people don't understand necessarily that they negotiate. They think it's communication, it's crisis dispute management, but it's negotiation, and negotiation and emotional intelligence go hand in hand, because we are negotiating with human beings who are motivated by emotions, who are managed by emotions. Like, you have so many negotiation books saying, leave the emotions out of this. And I wonder, from a neuroscience point of view, how? Like, are you going to go inside your brain and say, okay, limbic brain, you're
Yeah,
staying
you
home
gotta
now because
you
I'm
have
going
to
to
integrate
negotiate.
them. You gotta get
You're not going to
yeah.
come with me. Like, how? That doesn't work. And that's utopic to even want that. So then the goal is, okay, how can I befriend it? How can I understand emotions so that they can serve me and not, make a mess out of me when I become too emotional, be it sad or angry
Yeah.
or whatever it is? How can I use the emotions in my favor so that I can also connect with somebody else who's going through an emotion and understand that it's not this scary thing. It's just a neurological, physiological reaction of the brain of something that is perceived. So once we understand the emotions better and we're not afraid of them anymore, of our own emotions, then we can connect with others who are going through an emotion. And yeah, emotional intelligence, I believe, we see it in the business world. It's becoming more and more important, and people are seeing the importance of it. And I'm very happy that they do. We see the positive impact on leadership. So yes, I think overall, globally, we're moving towards a world where people are more open-minded about emotional intelligence and understand this is not something you can just push away. That's wishful thinking. So might as well learn about it and make it an ally.
I appreciate that. And again, just as you speak, I picked up on another nugget there, and that is that it's almost as though all professions, when you become a professional, you have to leave emotions out of it and detach from that. And so it's almost like reintegrating that back in and changing that.
Absolutely.
Mindset.
I think that is one major mistake in the professional negotiation world, in medical world, where they say, you're a professional and you're just going to deliver this news very factually, and you always focus on the medical terms and the facts, and that's it. But you're not a robot, and you're not talking to a robot. Like, we're not there yet. So while we're still human.
The interesting thing about that is when we take off our professional hat and we reverse the roles, that's not what we want.
Exactly.
And yet when we put that professional hat on, that's what we do.
It's amazing. Lousin, it's almost like what Troy's question reminded me of is, and I won't ask you to go down the whole example, but you have a wonderful example that you use in the selling of a house to describe the transformation of power, the perception of power, that how you perceive power as a psychological construct is something that's much different than what real power is. And you used the example of selling a house for $800,000, or do you remember this conversation in the other podcast?
Yeah, it's all about perception of value.
Right.
I think the example I gave, and it can be anything. If you're selling your car, for example, and you wanted $10,000 for the car, and you put it online, and you have no clients, nobody calling you for weeks, and then finally somebody calls you, and they come and they have a look, and they offer you 8,000. You're going to be super happy with those 8,000. And if you had put it on the market for, let's say, 9,000, and the same day you have 5 people calling, first one comes, yes, I'm buying it for 9,000.
Right, and then you're not happy because I left money on the table.
Yeah. Exactly, because you got it too quickly, so you don't value it, and you're thinking, oh shit, I could have gotten more. That's what you think. So same situation, 9,000, 8,000. You're happier with the 8,000. Why? Because you had to fight for it, you had to wait for it, etc., etc. So value, there is nothing like reality. What is reality? What is real? What is normal, etc.? It's all a perception. And in negotiation, our job is not to convince. Our job is to influence, and it's to influence the perception of value.
Yeah.
And and on the medical world, it's exactly the same. I remember once there was a doctor who told me that I had to give a certain treatment to my son, and the side effects were really, really severe. His behavior is already not easy, so this was going to transform him into a monster. And I was explaining, as a mother, I'm really afraid of this. Like, I'm afraid of the side effects on his behavior. And in that moment, we were sitting in front of him, and I had given my phone to my son to play with while I was talking to the doctor. And I'm telling him, I said, his behavior is not easy. He can become very, aggressive at times. And this is baseline Alex behavior. So if we're going to put this medication on top, which is known to have severe side effects in terms of behavior, bye, Phil, thank you. What's going to happen? And, the doctor is looking at Alex, who's on my phone, and says, his behavior seems fine to me. Like, in that moment, he breaks my trust of, like, are you taking me seriously? Are you listening to me? And of course, we started the treatment. He went ballistic, like his behavior became horrible, very
Yeah.
aggressive, started hitting his sister, and I know it's from this drug. And instead of going back to the doctor and say, oh, this is what happened, I didn't go back to the doctor. I stopped the drug, looked for another neurologist, and
Good
my
for
trust
you.
in him was gone. I never went back to him.
Yep.
And that's what happens when you don't take your patients seriously. They're not necessarily going to tell you they don't agree. They're just not going to come back, or they're not going to do what you tell them to do, and they're going to tell you that they're doing it. And that's even worse, because you think you're helping them, but you're not. So it's just so important to listen to your patients, and also have the humility to understand you are not responsible for them getting better. You are responsible for advising the best treatment you can.
I love the way that you
That's where it
frame that.
stops.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Amy Wilson, you have your hand up, and it's so delightful. You're on mute though, Amy. Do you have TikTok, Lousin?
No, I'm
You
not on
don't.
TikTok. I'm only on LinkedIn, and I'm very
Only on
active
LinkedIn. Okay. Amy is the founder and chairperson of Safety Positive, which is an organization that serves people who live with blindness, and I'm a board member with her on the
Great.
organization. Great to see you, Amy.
Apparently I was unmuted. I don't know. Anyways,
Okay.
Hold on a second. You gotta love voiceover on phones. But anywho, it wants to play the when people are chatting, it runs it while I'm trying to talk, and then it distracts me. So anyways, I just wanted to say, like, I was sitting there like applauding while you were talking, and like, amen, like throughout your story, because as a blind person, I've encountered, different doctors. I've heard countless stories from disabled individuals from, across the world, who've, encountered, doctors who have screwed up, interactions. When you were talking about, how when they're delivering bad news, oh my goodness, I don't know how many times, I've shared stories with people, but one of the things that caught me off guard in your story is, now I want to call my dad afterwards and go, Dad, I love you. And, because there were times when I was growing up with my, because I was diagnosed when I was 10 with my vision, but there were times where, I was struggling, but I know, hearing your story, like, he was suffering too. And so that brings a new perspective to me, but it also brings a new perspective that I need to be reaching out to more parents and teaching them about, negotiating on behalf of their blind children, because it is so vitally important. I'm already very much aware that when there's a diagnosis like that grieving process is very much there for the the person, but it's there for the family as well. I also wanted to note that my husband has cystic fibrosis, and when he was diagnosed with it when he was 12, they basically gave him the "you're going to die in 3 years" speech, and then when he turned 15 they were like, "you're going to die in 3 years." He is now just turned 52 years old, and he basically he's got a great doctor now, but he had a lot of doctors over the years that were, you know, giving him different advice or recommendations where he was like, "No, I'm not listening to that." And that sort of business. So you know, medical advancements are coming along a long ways. I know in particular with my husband's, he's actually with his, you know, with cystic fibrosis, they actually made a movie, 6 Feet Apart, and all that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
they end up being in the hospital like every 3 to 6 months, and he's been out of the hospital for over a year now. It's so I'm encouraged that, you know, medical advancements are happening all the time. But
Yeah.
so but your story, like I see parents, like you're sort of in the minority of parents, unfortunately, that are like, "You know what, this is my kid is worth it. I'm gonna get in the fight, and I'm not gonna let these doctors bully me around and tell me what's right for my kid." I see far more parents that are like, "Well, you know, little Timmy needs me to do everything for him, and I'm gonna listen to everything the doctors say." And I'm just like, "What are you doing?" So, yes, we need more parents like you to be out there telling doctors, you know, stop screwing it up, and you need to be out there telling parents to start advocating for your kids. So,
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that, and definitely give a tight hug to your father next time.
Yes.
He deserves it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, I just want to make a side note here that obviously I'm not saying medical stuff is not to be trusted, etc. in any way. Like, we need a collaboration. It's not that the doctors know everything. It's not that the parents know everything, but this is a collaboration. You know, the medical doctors know the medical stuff, and the parents know the kid. So that's
That's
how we
right.
have to
It's a
collaborate.
partner.
It's a partnership, and this reminded
Exactly.
me of, for example, when I was pregnant of my second, the delivery of Alex was a catastrophe. So the second time I decided I want to do this on my own. I don't want any painkillers. I don't want anybody in the room. I'll call them when the baby's coming. And I had written this whole plan, like this is the way I want it to be, and send that to the hospital weeks in advance. But when I came to the hospital, you know, ready to deliver, the nurse was super angry, saying, "I read your note, and I just want to tell you, I know my job." And while I'm going through the contractions, I told her, "Well, that's wonderful. I know my body, so let's do this together." We need to take patients seriously. We need to obviously take medical stuff seriously as well, but this is not a fight. This is a collaboration. This doesn't have to be a competitive negotiation, but we do have to accept that the decision maker, the final decision maker, is the patient or the patient's caregivers. And that's just a fact. As a medical staff, your goal is to recommend, is to advise, is to share your knowledge, but it stops there. You're not responsible of curing anybody. That is the patient's responsibility. And we've done this. We've done, you know, at the company that I collaborate with. It's fascinating. We've done a very simple 2-question study at the entrance of hospitals, where we went and knocked on doctors' doors and said, "Why do patients come and see you?" And they said, "Because they want to be cured." Like, that was the main answer that came back. That's why they come and see me, because they want to be cured. And then we asked the patients at the entrance of the hospital, "Why do you go see your doctor?" And the answer was mostly, "Because I'm sick." That's not the same thing at all. because then you ask a second question. Okay, but why do you come to see him specifically today, him or her, obviously? And then it was, I'm coming for a second opinion. I'm coming because I'm lonely.
Whole range of things.
I'm
Right.
coming because I don't agree. I'm coming because I'm afraid of the side effects. I'm coming because I'm not sure. I'm coming because I don't feel well, etc., etc. And it's rarely because I want to be cured. So it's just the assumptions that need to change, and they have to, put a healthy dose of humility of saying, my role is to advise. That's it. I'm sharing my knowledge. Like, this is what I've studied for, but it's not my responsibility. And don't have sleepless nights if your patient is not listening, because they too have to take their part of responsibility and saying, I'm responsible for my health. And I have to do whatever I think is best for me with the knowledge that I have, thanks to you. But I decide.
Beautiful. Troy, please.
And I think that's very profound and insightful. And I would just add to that something that Lousin already said, and that is why medical professionals need to learn active listening skills, because it is their job to advise. But in order to properly advise, they need to engage in those active listening skills so that they better understand the patient, and that can go on. So you're spot on.
Yeah, so we have a lot of work to do, everybody here. Let's train whoever we can train, whoever we can reach. Like, I'm doing the best I can on LinkedIn and YouTube. I share this stuff, and I'll continue to do so, because like, just the act of active listening, what you said, Troy, is just such a massive game changer, right? And we can all improve our listening skills over and over again. We're never done learning. But yeah, it's a massive, massive game changer. Andy, shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, Lucina, I was just going to say, how can people follow you and learn more about your work and what's available to them through the social media platforms? Let people know.
Yeah, well, I'm just on LinkedIn, very actively sharing a lot of stuff, professional stuff, personal stuff. So that's one way. I have an account on Facebook and Instagram, but I don't use that. And YouTube, I put some videos. I've done a podcast called Life Negotiations, where I talk to professional negotiators of this beautiful skill, on this beautiful skill of negotiation. And that's where I talk to Gary and Jack and some other very inspiring people. So you can learn from them as well if you're interested in this art and science of negotiation. Loads of stuff I share online.
Well, we look forward to having you back, Lousin, and maybe furthering the conversation about meaningful services and education for people in the healthcare domain on how to break bad news and how to develop, let's say, meaningful influence during the delivery of information that is not going to be received well. We need it in so many domains of life. It doesn't just serve physicians. It serves so many professions where we have to, advise someone that and anticipate that the way that they're going to experience it is going to, inspire negative emotion. How do we do that in a way that, reduces arousal and sets the stage for some kind of meaningful integration? Lots of ideas on how that works. Thank you so very much for gracing us with your presence. We witness you. We witness your journey. You're inspiring, and our community has really turned out today to experience you and benefit from what you've gone through. And thank you. And our very, very best to Alex and your family. And just a complete delight to be with you this past hour.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for your active participation. I'm reading everything in the chat as well. It was a pleasure being here. And yeah, happy to come back and talk about how we can help anybody, from patients to professionals in any field of teaching and learning together on how to communicate better, how to listen better, how to bond better, how to build trust better. Because in the end, the whole goal is to prevent conflict and to resolve conflict.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Lousin.